There's new fallout from the tragic school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. NBC News confirmed Wednesday that Uvalde School's police chief Pete Arredondo could be fired at a special school board meeting slated for this weekend. This follows that 81-page report by a special Texas State House committee on the multiple failures that led to the shooting. School meetings have been going on all week after the district announced it would implement new security measures before kids return to classrooms next month, including erecting 8-foot non-scalable fences around all of its campuses. But at a school board meeting on Monday, dozens of angry parents and teachers took the floor for 3 hours, blasting officials and saying those measures weren't nearly enough.
If he's not fired by noon tomorrow, then I want your resignation and every single one of you board members, because y'all do not give a damn about our children or us.
What are you gonna do to make sure I don't have to wait 77 minutes bleeding out on my classroom floor, just like my little sister did?
This was the last dress that all my friends saw me on. Most of those kids were my friends. And that's not good. And I don't wanna go to your guys' school if they don't have protection.
Also on Monday, the Texas Department of Public Safety announced it would conduct an internal investigation of its response to the shooting. DPS had 91 state troopers on the scene, more cops than all the local Uvalde officers combined. The investigation marks a big shift for DPS, which had previously laid the blame on local police for the standoff with the gunman, who was in the school for 77 minutes before being killed by officers. All of this comes as the weekend report put heavy scrutiny on the police response to the shooting. The report also raised eyebrows by concluding that, except for the shooter, there were no bad guys here. Quote, other than the attacker, the committee did not find any villains in the course of its investigation. There is no one to whom we can attribute malice or ill motives. Instead, we found systemic failures and egregious poor decision-making. Should that really be the standard for accountability here, though? The report said there were 376 police officers on the scene, and they took nearly an hour and a half to confront a lone gunman with a rifle in a classroom of children. Does it matter to the dead and their families whether it was malice or incompetence that killed them? The outcome was the same either way. There's no question we have to tackle these systemic failures in identifying potential mass shooters, in preventing them from arming themselves, and yes, in having police forces that do their jobs. But how do we do that? Joining me now is Texas State Representative Joe Moody. He's the vice chair of the Texas House's Investigative Committee on the Robb Elementary School shooting, and the only Democrat on that 3-person committee. Representative Moody, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us about the effort that went into putting this report together and the emotions that you felt as you sifted through that evidence.
Well, it was an enormous amount of information to go through. We requested the entire investigative file from the Department of Public Safety. That was over 48,000 records that were supplied to us. We conducted our own interviews in person of individuals who were on scene that day, and also some experts on law enforcement response and school security and things of the like. If we weren't able to interview people directly, we had statements, both audio and video, that had been recorded previous to that. So we looked through a mountain of evidence, and I will say, as a father of 3 young children, probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, but it pales in comparison to the suffering of the families there in Uvalde and what they've been through since May 24th.
Your report noted that there were systemic failures, but no villains. But critics would say that there needs to be some accountability for the officers who exhibited what the report called egregious poor decision-making. What would you say to them? And what was the reasoning behind that no villains conclusion?
I think it is important to understand that the attacker here was the one that made these violent decisions to do this on that day. Accountability is not far away from the conclusions of this report. Our task as a committee was to lay the facts bare, to understand what happened. And I think we presented what is a complicated answer. it's easy to point your finger at one person or one thing, but here entire systems failed. And so since our report has been released, you've seen DPS begin an investigation into their own actions. You've seen the city of Uvalde do the same with their police department, and you've seen a number of actions be taken at the school board locally there. There will be accountability on all levels, and those things are going to happen in different places. Accountability will also help happen when we work on these systems as a legislative body as well. So I think that the task was accomplished in laying the facts out, because once the facts are something that we can stand on firmly, we then can turn towards the accountability piece and then what we do going forward.
There does seem to be some moves toward accountability. The Uvalde School District today has said that it's going to possibly terminate Police Chief Arredondo's contract. But DPS troopers were also on the scene. I think something like 91 of them. You're a state representative. So what about DPS Chief Stephen McCraw? Do you think that he should keep his job or lose his job based on the information, the evidence that you've gone through?
There's two lanes that I would discuss DPS in when it comes to this tragedy. One is the law enforcement response that day, and while there are 91 on scene, I think it is worth noting there are hundreds of officers around, but hundreds of there's a large chunk of those that never come anywhere near the site, do not have information, don't have good information, or have outright misinformation given to them. So you kind of have to set those aside. You're looking at maybe the 36 that are closest to that hallway and that building that have the ability to understand the situation, or at a minimum have the ability to understand they need to question more about it. Those are the questions we need to answer in terms of DPS and their actions there. The other is they take over this investigation not very long after the attacker is killed. Right? So they are in charge of the information flow. There's a section of our report about information flow and how we feel that that was handled in a way that caused more trauma for the families in Uvalde. I think there is accountability that has to be had on how they handle that information flow, providing information in briefings that had not been verified and that was verifiable. That is something that we need to expect more from law enforcement on. And to the extent that Director McCraw was in control of those decisions, then there needs to be accountability as well. That we heard time and time again from the families. The way the information flowed harmed them again and again and again, and there needs to be accountability on that front.
I think another concern that a lot of folks have is that blaming systemic failures can sometimes also be a crutch to avoid the hard work of correcting those failures. You have Governor Greg Abbott, who's taken heat for avoiding Uvalde since he was booed there in May. Abbott has been focusing on mental health assessment as a response, but he said little about reforming law enforcement or making it harder to obtain assault weapons. I mean, as you see it, how should we tackle these big systemic issues in such a divided political climate?
Well, I think that is the complicated path in front of us, but so much so in politics today, and you know this probably better than most, people start with the answers and don't care about the facts. That's what was important about this report. It lays out the facts. It lays out where we have failures in systems across the board, whether it be school security, public safety. If you want to talk about mental illness and those services we provide, I think it's here too. Access to weapons, that is here too. Information flow, we talked about that already. If you're not willing to talk about all of those things at the same time, then you are doing a disservice to the community you serve and the entire state of Texas. And so we should not be afraid about tackling all of those topics. They're difficult, but if you're in this work, then you should be up to the challenge of doing difficult work.
One last question before I let you go. State Democrats have been calling for a special session to address the Uvalde failures. You have Abbott locked in a difficult reelection race with your fellow El Pasoan, Beto O'Rourke. And of course, you have the congressional majority on the line in November. Do you think that Uvalde changed the political dynamics in Austin to get something done? Or will it just be buried by business as usual at the Capitol?
We started calling for a special session in the wake of the racist mass shooting here in El Paso, and that that call is still out there to go back and work on these if we have the opportunity. Do I think the tone and the tenor has changed around this conversation? All I have to do is look at the fact that Washington, D.C. produced a bill on gun safety. That is a place that is broken, in my opinion, and it doesn't usually produce consensus or bipartisan work on anything. And so the fact that they were able to get that done, whether I think it was enough or not, it was something. And I think that is something we need to point at. If we're not able to at least replicate that or do something better for the state of Texas, then that's a massive failure. So yes, I believe the tone and tenor has changed, and I believe we need to continue to push for that. If you can get it done in a place like DC, then we should be able to get it done in Austin.